Moses had it rough. Born to a poor Israelite in Egypt, floated down the river to escape the killing of the firstborn, raised by the Pharaoh's daughter, called by God to be the liberator of the Israelite people. Then there were the plagues, and the run-ins with Pharaoh, and fleeing the Egyptian army, crossing the Red Sea, all then to be the leader of 600,000 Israelites who couldn't quite figure out how to follow God's new rules, and who were looking for a promised land that they couldn't find in the harsh wilderness. It's quite the job description, and I bet it's not exactly what Moses signed up for. Most of us are pretty familiar with that Exodus portion of the story, the one that Hollywood has been so good and so frequent in retelling over the years. But we don't talk quite as much about the wandering in the desert bits. After all, 40 years of that is a little less exciting than clouds of locusts and an angel of death. But there is a reason that the Torah doesn't stop after the book of Exodus. If the stories of Genesis and Exodus are the tale of how the Israelites came to be born as a people, then the other three books, Leviticus, Numbers, and Deuteronomy, are the story of the Israelites' development from childhood into maturity. Their growing pains, their mistakes, their learning experiences, the development of their collective identity as a community. So I bring you the vignette that I told earlier this morning because I think there is a rich conversation to be had about that kind of development for modern people, especially within the context of a congregation that is as new as Open Circle. This story is from the 11th chapter of the book of Numbers. And so the context is that the people have been out in the wilderness for about a year and a half at this point, and things are not going well. It's important to note that they're not in crisis anymore. They've got Moses as their leader and Aaron as the second in command. They've got God's laws, all 600 and however many of them that have been delivered. So it's not that their society is without structure. They've got enough to eat and drink, since God gave them the manna and the water, so they're not starving. It's that they're in a rut. So one day Moses is off doing his leader thing, and the people are just sitting around. The passage in Numbers starts with the riffraff among them began to crave other food. And again, the Israelites started wailing and said, "If only we had meat to eat. We remember the fish we ate in Egypt at no cost. Also the cucumbers, melons, leeks, onions, and garlic. But now we have lost our appetite. We never see anything but that manna." It's not really the most attractive side of the Israelites, this particular passage, but on first glance, they sound like overdramatic, whiny kids. But when you consider this story from a human development perspective, this discontent is actually right on schedule. Remember that the Israelites were in captivity not that long ago. They were told what to do, where to go, where to eat, and they didn't have any choices. But now they've been liberated. They're on their own, at least theoretically. They're being told that they are the chosen people, that they will now have responsibility for their own society, and that they will have free will and their own choices now. The issue is that their bodies have been liberated, but their minds haven't yet. Instead of Pharaoh, they've got Moses. Instead of Egyptian law, which they did not create or choose, now they've got God's law, which they did not create or choose. So they feel disempowered, dissatisfied, and disillusioned. Well, we didn't have much more authority or agency now than we did in Egypt, but at least the food was better there. And now for his part, Moses is stuck too, and he's pretty ticked off. The passage says, he asked the Lord, Why have you brought all this trouble on your servant? What have I done to displease you that you put the burden of all these people on me? Did I conceive all these people? Did I give them birth? Why do you tell me to carry them in my arms as a nurse carries an infant to the land that you promised on oath to their ancestors? Where can I get meat for all these people? They keep wailing to me, give us meat to eat. I cannot carry all these people by myself. The burden is too heavy for me. If this is how you're going to treat me, please go ahead and kill me. If I have found favor in your eyes, and do not let me face my own ruin. Like I said before, Moses was a little overdramatic sometimes. So we've got a dissatisfied people craving more authority and purpose and variety in their lives. And we've got a leader who feels burned out and overburdened. The people don't know how to get any power, and Moses doesn't know how to give any of his power away. And nobody's happy. So this kind of thing, in a far less dramatic way, is not uncommon in new communities, and in churches in particular. It happens because there is this huge spurt of initial effort to get a congregation on its feet, usually spearheaded by a small group of dedicated, hardworking people who share a vision. By necessity, they take on the burdens of leadership, and they try to recruit other people to follow along. They organize, they build relationships and trust, and they get other people to join in. They set up governance structures and policies and procedures, and if they're lucky, things get off and running. But once you have that stability, a new set of challenges emerges. You've got this core group of people who have held the power and made the decisions, and then a larger group of people who have arrived to be a part of the community and yet remain on the fringes. Thomas R. Hawkins, who's a church consultant and a theorist about congregational dynamics, refers to this as the model of heroic leadership. Just like Moses, heroic leaders tend to be hubs of all the information in the community. They know and do everything, and they create organizational cultures where they alone are responsible for the system's performance, Hawkins says. So in the church setting, this can look like the same few names appearing on the rosters of all the different committees in the church. Or a large group of congregants who have come into the community but can't quite figure out where their niche is. And if this goes on too long, now remember this is a necessary step, it's not a bad step, but if it goes on too long, you end up with what leadership consultant Peter Block refers to as the consumer model of belonging. When power is not fully distributed and accessible within the community, constituents start viewing leaders as service providers and suppliers, meters of needs, expecting them to solve the problems for them and satisfy their needs, rather than finding ways to participate as engaged members. Like Moses, heroic leaders often find themselves in the difficult position of always putting out the latest fire that's cropped up. And so what happens is that the urgent replaces the important in leadership. Those people are complaining about the lack of a varied diet, and it sounds like the most important thing in the world right then, but it doesn't allow you to look forward to creating the vision for the society. Sometimes heroic leaders are fulfilling their own needs to feel irreplaceable or important. Sometimes it's about community members who would rather have their leaders do the hard work of change instead of doing it themselves. But I think most often it's simply that, like Moses and the Israelites, things have been set up in a particular way, and despite everyone's good intentions, it's hard to imagine the new, more balanced power structure in which people are empowered to share responsibility for the vision and direction of the community. There is a time and a place for heroic leadership. Sometimes we need great charismatic leaders or groups of leaders to bring liberty and change and revolution. But new societies, new organizations, and the new communities that these heroic leaders create can't survive and thrive forever without going through the always turbulent and often painful process of maturation and metamorphosis. So this is where the story of Moses and the Israelites gets particularly interesting. There they are, frustrated leader, frustrated people, and Moses just loses it. And this is the fascinating part. He doesn't yell and scream at the people. He asks for help. I mean, he is overdramatic about it, asking God to either take him away or kill him, but he is able to admit that the task has gotten too big for him and that there has to be a better way. And what I love about this passage is that God listens. God doesn't always listen in the Hebrew Scriptures, but God listens here. The Lord said to Moses, "Bring me 70 of Israel's elders who are known to you as leaders and officials among the people. Have them come to the tent of meeting that they may stand there with you. I will come down and speak with you there, and I will take some of the power of the Spirit that is on you and put it on them. They will share the burden of the people with you, so that you will not have to carry it alone." So you see what happened there? God didn't simply take Moses' burden and put it on somebody else. God asks Moses to go and choose those 70 people, thereby acknowledging that it is Moses' power to share, and that he must willingly give up that hero status in order to equitably distribute the power. And God doesn't tell him to just choose his favorites or the people that he knows best. God tells him to find the folks who are leaders and officials among the people. They might have different opinions or different leadership styles, different visions for what the people need. But because God frames it this way, God acknowledges that diversity is essential. It's not going to help anything if one hero leader is replaced by another, or a set of others that are cut from the exact same cloth. So Moses goes out, he finds the 70 leaders, and he brings them to the sacred tent of meeting. Then the Lord came down in the cloud and spoke with him, and took some of the power of the Spirit that was on him and put it on the 70 elders. And here's where it gets wild. The elders begin to prophesy. They have these moments of spiritual inspiration and ecstasy, and they start speaking their visions out loud right there in the tent. They haven't had power for more than a couple of minutes, and already they've got a new strategic plan for Israel. It's one thing to say that you want to share your power, and another to face the realities and implications of actually doing it. On the flip side, it's easy to say you want to have authority, and another to actually assume the burdens that come with deeper responsibility. Imagine Moses sitting there. Have you ever been the immediate ex-chair of a project or a committee or something, and the new person, you're sitting there listening? Imagine this. So Moses is sitting there and watching this new group of people who've never had a voice in the power structure before, and all of a sudden they start prophesying their vision for the people. And then there are these elders who've never had a voice in anything before, and all of a sudden they're actually having their opinions and ideas heard. They're imbued with this real authority that comes from the Spirit. Now, in unhealthy organizations, ones where everybody says they want to share power, they want change, but they're not actually ready for the realities of that, this is the moment where things usually fall apart. The old guard starts criticizing the new committee leaders behind their backs and undermining their authority, because that's just not the way we do things here. And then, for their part, the new leaders ignore the advice and experience of their elders and predecessors. They try and change things too quickly, and they're set up to fail. But in this story, something different happens. They're sitting there in the tent. The new leaders have just finished prophesying, and all of a sudden this young man comes up from the camp and runs in. He says to Moses that there are two people down in the camp who are also prophesying. One of Moses' aides is totally freaked out by this, and he says, "Moses, my lord, stop them." But Moses pauses. In this moment, I imagine that Moses has this intense inner monologue with himself. He goes, "All right, this is it. Moment of truth. I asked for this to happen. I was willing to share the power with these elders, and already it's going in unanticipated directions. Who are these yahoos out in the camp, and how did they get power if the Spirit was supposed to come to the tent? What if they've got this vision that is totally out of whack with everything that I've been working to build?" But somehow, Moses is able to let it go. He lets go of his attachment to everything he's worked for, his ego, his desire for control. And in that moment, I imagine he's got a flash of the future in which he knows that the Israelites are going to reach the promised land, but that he's not going to make it there with them. The story is longer than his own short life, and the vision is more expansive than his particular slice of the insight. So he grits his teeth and he takes a deep breath and he finds his best self. And he says, "Are you jealous for my sake?" He says this to the aide who comes in all panicked. "I wish that all of the Lord's people were prophets, and that the Lord would put the Spirit on all of them." Then Moses and the elders of Israel returned to the camp. The moment when the members of a young community embrace a new paradigm of leadership and power is the moment when that community makes the choice to value its future over its past. I offer you this story today because I believe that Open Circle Unitarian Universalist Fellowship is in exactly this phase in its development as a congregation. I've only been with you for 2 months as your minister, and so I don't claim to know all of the nuances of this community's story. I don't know all of the history. But I do know from the stories that I've heard that you have so much to be grateful for from the incredible people who labored with love and integrity and compassion and vision to create the foundations that this community rests on today. I also know that because of their work, there are now new voices that are a part of this community. Voices with different life experiences and different visions of what this community might grow to become. So the challenge that this congregation will face, and I believe that you are already embracing and navigating with courage and wisdom, is the question of what the next paradigm for leadership will be. So when you hear the story of Moses and the Israelites, where are you in it? Are you someone who feels like you're eating manna and watching the leaders from down in the camp? Then maybe it's time to think about stepping up, making a deeper commitment by joining a committee or starting a small group, maybe even expressing your interest in becoming a member or even joining the board down the road. Come to our worship workshop in November, or ask how you can become a leader before somebody recruits you. Or are you someone who all of a sudden, and maybe without your asking for it, has had the spirit of authority blow across you? Josh, I'm looking at you. This might be your moment to prophesy bravely, to speak your ideas aloud, even though they may be different than what has been done before. Claim your authority to do so, because the same spirit of authority that empowers the leaders who have been around for generations is the same spirit of power that empowers you. Or have you been shouldering the burden of leadership all along, setting the vision and building the foundations that undergird this congregation? Do you know that you have wisdom and insight to share, but that you are also called to empower others and cultivate leadership in the next generation? Then perhaps your job is to wait a little longer before saying yes to spearheading that next project, or being the first one to speak your thoughts in a meeting, or agreeing to another term as chair of that committee. My friends, you are at exactly the right phase in your development. This congregation has showed incredible vision and dedication and wisdom. You have crossed the Red Sea, and you have made your covenant with each other. And that is something to be proud of. You began in a living room, and now you have a building, you have a religious education program, a smart board, and people who are working on a healthy congregations team, and people who are planting the seeds of a pastoral care program. You're on your way. Do you know that my clergy colleagues call this congregation the little congregation that could? That's true. I heard that from 3 people. But it's not just what you've accomplished. You also love each other. You trust each other. And that, my friends, is what is going to take this community into the next phase. Grounded in that love and trust, I have no doubt that you will be able to envision the next steps and empower the next generation of leaders. And then, when the time comes, and the next generation after that starts complaining about all the manna they have to eat, you'll be ready to do it again. The spirit of authority blows upon all of us, my friends, and calls all of us to be empowered and to empower one another. May we have gratitude for the leadership that has brought us out of the past. May we have the wisdom to see the gifts and potential that surround us in the present. And may we have the courage to claim and share the power that will shape the future. May it be so. Blessed be Ashe and Amen. Let's sing. I invite you to rise and body.